I've heard of people getting cheated on. It's humiliating, soul-crushing, and unfortunately common. But what happened to me wasn't ordinary infidelity. Discovering that your wife is secretly having dinner with her supposedly dead ex-husband doesn't fall into any standard category. That's not betrayal. It's stepping into an entirely different reality. It happened on a Wednesday. I remember because every Wednesday I stopped at the same corner deli on my way home. Same sandwich, same cashier, same routine. My life was predictable. It was structured and dull, but I liked it that way. I walked out of the deli with my turkey wrap and turned toward the parking lot when I saw her, my wife, through the glass windows of a small restaurant a few doors down. She looked relaxed, her posture open, laughing gently the way she used to when we first met. That laugh had become rare at home. She wasn't alone. There was a man sitting across from her. I couldn't see his face clearly at first, but his mannerisms struck a nerve. The way he leaned in, the slight tapping of his fingers on the table, it all felt familiar. And when he turned slightly and I saw his full face, my legs felt like they would give out. It was Daniel, her ex-husband, the same man whose funeral I had attended 5 years ago, the man I comforted her over, the man she cried for in my arms. I remember the funeral clearly, the framed photo on the table, the flowers, the church full of quiet grief. She had nearly collapsed in the bathroom. I had cleaned her face with tissues from a vending machine. I had been there. I had lived through it with her, or so I believed, yet here he was, alive and completely at ease. And she wasn't shocked to see him. She wasn't crying or yelling or frozen with disbelief. She looked normal, comfortable, like she had done this a dozen times before. That's what hit me the hardest, the familiarity, the absence of panic. She glanced up and saw me. Our eyes met through the glass. She didn't flinch. She didn't look away. She smiled, a small, tired smile, like she'd been waiting for this moment, like she wasn't caught, but rather revealing something that had already been decided. And in that moment, something broke inside me, because she didn't look guilty. She looked done, like this was already over for her, long before I even walked by. I turned and walked away. My hands were shaking. I couldn't think. I couldn't even remember what I had just bought. I ended up sitting on the sidewalk near the parking lot, staring blankly at the ground. The air around me felt thick. Nothing made sense. If Daniel was alive, why had there been a funeral? Why had she cried? Why had we lived with his ghost between us all these years? I went home in a daze and sat in the dark. I didn't turn on the lights. I didn't eat. I didn't move. I expected her to come home eventually to say something, anything. But she didn't. Not that night. Not the next morning. I waited for a text, a call, an explanation. Nothing came. Just silence. At some point during the night, I started looking through old news articles. I dug into obituaries, crash reports, anything that could confirm Daniel's death. But there was nothing solid. No police record, no official statement. Just the funeral. Just her story. I even realized there had never been a burial. No casket I remembered seeing. Just a memorial service with a closed display. That absence became a new kind of weight on my chest. What if I wasn't the only one she lied to? What if I was? Was everyone in on it? Did her family know? Did her friends? Had I been the only one living in this carefully constructed illusion? I started questioning everything. Our wedding, the timelines, her job, the weekends she spent visiting her mother. What if it had all been fabricated around a lie I was never meant to uncover? As the sun rose, I realized I hadn't slept. I hadn't moved. The sandwich I'd bought was still in its bag, untouched on the counter, and I hadn't heard from her. It was like she had vanished completely. But deep down, I knew she hadn't vanished. She had simply gone back to wherever or whoever she had never actually left. I wasn't cheated on. I was erased. The silence after that night wasn't just absence. It was intent. She didn't forget to come home. She didn't lose her phone. She chose not to speak, and that told me more than any confrontation ever could. I was left with questions she had no intention of answering, and that truth alone was its own kind of violence. I spent the next day in a fog, moving around the house like a guest in a museum. Every photo of us on the wall, every little note she had left over the years, birthday cards, shopping lists, scribbles on the fridge, suddenly felt fake. I studied her handwriting like it belonged to a stranger. I tried to remember how her voice sounded when she said my name, but it all felt distant now, like I was recalling the memory of a dream I no longer trusted. By the third day, I stopped expecting her return, not because I gave up, but because I understood. If she had any intention of facing me, she would have done it already. Her silence was her decision, and I had to make mine. I started collecting evidence, not out of revenge, but clarity. I went through old files, emails, receipts, looking for cracks in the timeline. Her weekend trips to her sister's house suddenly felt suspicious. I checked her location history, bank transactions, even scanned photos for background clues. It was like investigating a person I thought I knew, and slowly, a pattern emerged. A different email account. Hotel stays in cities she claimed to have never visited. Phone calls at strange hours, hidden layers to a woman I had shared my life with. But what disturbed me most wasn't the lies. It was how effortlessly she had lived them. I remembered our 3rd anniversary, how she cried during dinner, saying how grateful she was for our life together. I replayed her words in my head over and over. They had sounded real. I had believed them. Now I wondered who she was thinking about that night. Was she mourning him? Missing him? Or maybe she wasn't thinking of either of us. Maybe she just wanted to see if she could still lie that well. I told no one. I didn't want the sympathy. I didn't want anyone looking at me like I was a fool, because I already felt like one. Instead, I isolated myself. I stopped answering messages. I declined invites. I ignored my mother's calls, my friends' texts. There was no one who could make it make sense. So what was the point in talking? The hardest part wasn't anger, it was disbelief. That's what truly eats at you, not the rage, but the confusion, the endless loop of questions that never get answered, the moments that play on repeat but never resolve. That's where madness grows, in the empty space where meaning should be. One night, I found myself driving past the restaurant again, not intentionally. My body just led me there, like it had become a part of me now. The lights were still warm and soft through the windows. Couples laughed. Glasses clinked. I didn't go in, I just sat across the street and watched, half hoping they'd be there again, half hoping it had all been a terrible hallucination. They weren't there, but that didn't bring relief, it brought something worse. Finality. The next morning, I packed a bag. I didn't know where I was going yet, but I knew I couldn't stay in that house one more night. It wasn't my home anymore. It was a monument to someone else's performance. Her perfume still lingered on the bedsheets. Her hair tie still hung on the bathroom door. These remnants weren't comforting. They were mocking. Before leaving, I wrote a note. Not for her, for myself. Just a few words scribbled in the corner of a receipt. If she ever tells you why, don't believe it. I folded it, placed it in my wallet, and walked out the door. Not as a husband, not even as a man betrayed, but as someone finally stepping out of a lie they didn't write. My everyday life had become something strange and unfamiliar to me. The house I lived in, the city I walked through, the faces I passed, everything felt distant, hollow. Nothing held the same meaning anymore. What consumed my mind was why I had been living inside a lie for so long. How had everything been so easily disguised as reality? I had become a stranger in my own life. That night, when I finally found out what she had done, why she went to that dinner, and that Daniel, the man everyone thought was dead, was actually alive, I realized I wasn't ready for the truth. It wasn't a simple betrayal or a clear-cut lie. The truth was far more complicated than I had imagined. She hadn't just lied to me. She hadn't even been honest with herself. Cheating is often painted as a moment of weakness or a lapse in judgment, but what I faced wasn't that simple. This was a carefully constructed reality that had been built over years, layer by layer. Maybe for her it was a form of escape, a way to reinvent herself and leave her past behind. But for me, it was like being completely erased from a life I thought I shared with someone I loved. Accepting the truth behind a lie is one of the hardest things a person can do. I tried to avoid it at first, to push it away, to pretend that if I closed my eyes, maybe it would all just disappear. But that was useless. The truth was cold, sharp, and it was everywhere. In every memory, every conversation, every moment that I now saw through a cracked lens. I kept thinking about the life I had before this unraveling began. The moments I thought were real, the laughter, the promises, the quiet mornings when everything seemed right. All those moments suddenly felt like scenes from someone else's story. The face she showed me, the woman I thought I knew, was maybe never the real person. The realization was crushing. I wasn't just hurt. I wasn't just angry. I felt like I didn't even know who I was anymore. The person I had loved, the woman who had promised forever, had created an illusion so convincing that even I was fooled. I remembered the times when she cried during our anniversary dinners, telling me how grateful she was for the life we had. Back then, I believed every word. Now I wondered who she was, really mourning. Was it Daniel? Was it me? Or was she mourning the lies she had told herself? Isolation became my refuge. I stopped answering calls, avoided texts, and withdrew from friends and family. There was no one who could make sense of what I was feeling or what had happened. Trying to explain it felt pointless, and sharing it felt like admitting defeat. So I lived in silence, in the echo chamber of my own thoughts. The hardest part was not the rage I expected to feel. It was the disbelief that gnawed at me day and night. The confusion of why, the endless questions without answers, the memories playing on repeat without closure. That void of meaning is where the worst kind of pain grows. It's a slow, quiet madness. One night, on a reckless impulse, I found myself driving past that same restaurant where I had seen them. The lights spilled out onto the street, warm and inviting, couples laughing inside, glasses clinking. I didn't go in. I just sat across the street watching, hoping, half wishing it had all been a terrible hallucination, but they weren't there, and the absence felt heavier than their presence ever could. The next morning, I packed a bag. I didn't know where I was going, only that I couldn't stay in that house any longer. It was no longer my home. It was a stage for someone else's story, a museum of false memories. Her scent lingered on the sheets, and her hair tie still hung on the bathroom door. These remnants didn't comfort me. They haunted me. Before I left, I wrote a note, not for her, but for myself, a reminder scrawled on the back of a receipt. If she ever tries to explain, don't believe it. I folded it carefully and slipped it into my wallet. I stepped out the door not as a husband betrayed, not as a man broken, but as someone finally walking away from a lie that wasn't his own. A lie he never wrote. Leaving the house that morning felt like stepping into the unknown. I didn't have a plan or a destination, just a heavy bag and a heavier heart. The familiarity of the life I'd built was gone. My marriage was a lie. My home was a prison, and the future I imagined disappeared overnight. It was as if the ground beneath me had crumbled, and I was left to find footing in empty air. I drove without much thought, my mind clouded with questions I couldn't answer. Every street, every corner reminded me of moments we shared, now stained by betrayal. I felt disconnected not just from her, but from myself. Who was I without her? Without the story I thought we were writing together? That question haunted me as I checked into a small motel on the outskirts of the city. The room was bare, cold, nothing like the home I'd left behind, but it was quiet, and for the first time in days, I had space to breathe. I sat on the edge of the bed, the weight of what I'd lost settling deeper with every passing second. I knew I needed to figure out what came next, but I also knew I couldn't do it alone. Pride and embarrassment kept me silent around friends and family, but the loneliness was crushing. I was trapped between wanting to talk and not knowing how to start. The next morning, I forced myself to call my best friend. His voice was rough from sleep, but he listened without judgment. I didn't say much at first, just the bare facts, but his steady presence was a lifeline. Sometimes just knowing someone was there made the impossible feel a little less so. Over the next few weeks, I started piecing together what I needed to do. Legal advice was first on the list. I needed to protect myself, financially, emotionally, and legally. Discovering that the man I thought was dead was alive meant everything was tangled. Marriage certificates, divorce papers, wills, bank accounts. I had to untangle the mess. At the same time, I began confronting my feelings. The anger, the betrayal, the sadness, they all fought for space inside me. Some days I wanted to scream at the world. Other days I wanted to disappear. Therapy helped me navigate this. Sitting in a room with a stranger and putting words to my pain was terrifying but necessary. It was the first step toward reclaiming control. Slowly, I began rebuilding. It wasn't about forgetting what happened, but learning to live with it. I started small, taking walks, reading books, reconnecting with hobbies I had abandoned. Each day was a small victory, a brick laid in the foundation of a new life. One night, I found myself staring at my phone, debating whether to block her number forever. I didn't want to live with hope or resentment. I wanted peace. So I deleted her contact and deleted the old photos from my gallery. It was symbolic, letting go of the past even if it still hurt. I wasn't sure what the future held, but I knew I was no longer a victim. I was a survivor, ready to find my own truth and my own happiness. It wouldn't be easy, and some days would still hurt, but I was done living in the shadow of lies. This was my story now, not hers. Not the past's, mine. After weeks of chaos, confusion, and heartbreak, I finally started to see a sliver of light. It wasn't sudden, nor was it bright. It was small, fragile, but enough to keep me moving forward. I realized that moving on wasn't about forgetting or pretending none of it happened. It was about taking control of my own life again, piece by piece. The legal battles dragged on longer than I expected. Sorting out assets, annulments, and financial entanglements with someone who had been erased from official records was a nightmare. But with every document signed and every phone call made, I felt more grounded. I wasn't helpless anymore. I was fighting back in my own way. Emotionally, the wounds still throbbed. Some days, memories would hit me like a punch, unexpected, sharp, but I learned to face them without letting them consume me. Therapy continued to be a safe space where I could unravel my tangled thoughts and rebuild my sense of self. I reconnected with people who mattered, friends who didn't ask questions, who just listened, family members who reminded me I wasn't alone. Their support was a reminder that I wasn't defined by this betrayal, but by how I chose to rise above it. I started setting new goals, personal, professional, simple things like traveling to places I'd always wanted to see or picking up hobbies I'd abandoned. These were small acts of reclaiming joy and purpose, things the shadow of my past had tried to steal. And then slowly, I began dating again. It wasn't easy. Trust felt fragile, like a glass that could shatter with a careless touch. But I reminded myself that the past didn't have to dictate the future. I was worthy of love, honesty, and respect. Looking back, I understood something important. Sometimes the people you love most can become strangers, and the truths you believe are just stories you're told. But that doesn't mean your story is over. It means you get to write the next chapter. I'm still healing. I probably always will be in some ways, but I'm no longer living in someone else's lie. I'm living my truth, and that makes all the difference.